Guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about The Princess and the Pea. This is a short story. It's not very long, it's not like the last one. And there aren't really any comparison stories. So I'm just going to say the story and then we'll talk a little bit about the author and a little bit about the story itself and dissect it a little bit. So let's dive right in. Alright? So The Princess and the Pea. It's just once upon a time, there was a prince, and he was looking for his princess. So he travels all over the world. But he doesn't necessarily believe all these girls who are calling themselves princesses. There's always something that's cueing him, telling him that there's something that they're lying about. He doesn't like this. So he returns back to his kingdom, to his home, to his mother and father, who are king and queen, right? Well, one night there's a terrible, terrible storm. And they hear knocking at the gate, or at the castle doors. And the king sends down someone to go check who is at the door. At the door is a beautiful girl, and she's sopping wet. He describes her as her hair is stringy because it's so wet. Her clothes are just clinging. They're soaking. There's so much water that her shoes aren't even staying on as she's walking. They invite her in, and they ask who she is. And she says she's a princess, but that she's lost, and if they could help her out. The queen says, I'll find out about this because my son has been searching for a princess, and I'm not going to have another girl lying to him. She's being a good mama, right? So she's got a little idea for her. I'm sure this castle has lots of rooms, but she brings the princess to this one room where she has a little test for her. She has stripped the bed and she's put a little tiny pea at the bottom, and then she's layered 20 mattresses and comforters. And then she says, all right, honey, this is the bed you'll sleep in. The princess, she must be just a very sweet, unassuming girl because she says, okay, thank you, good night. So they all go to bed. Next morning, they come down for breakfast and they ask her, well, how'd you sleep? And the princess says, horribly. I'm black and blue, from bruises, from tossing and turning. Didn't sleep a wink. Don't know why. Just could not get comfortable. Didn't matter that there were all these comforters, all these mattresses. I couldn't get any sleep. So the king and the queen, to them, they've decided that she must be a princess. Because only a princess would have been able to feel that little tiny pea underneath all those layers, and they give their blessing to their son to marry this girl, and they live happily ever after. And at the very end it says, see, this must be a true story. So now let's get into the author, the story, the time, and talk a little more about it. Princess and the Pea was written by Hans Christian Andersen, and he is very famous. We know him. He wrote Little Mermaid, which hopefully we will talk about, probably sooner than later. I just decided I wanted to do one a little bit less known because I don't want to just do well-known, and then run out of content and then have to do just a bunch of unknowns and then have no one interested. So, and what's interesting about this too is that The Princess and the Pea was one of his most famous pieces of work. In his time, and even after his time, I think it's just faded into the background because some of his other works came to the forefront in more modern times. But it was always one of my favorites growing up as a child. So this was written in 1835, and Hans Christian Andersen is a Danish writer. He was born to a couple of low-income parents, but they saw his imagination and they encouraged it, which is very interesting, especially for the time period that he grew up in. They didn't push him to go apprentice or earn money necessarily for the family. They encouraged him to pursue the arts, and he tried a few different things before he became a famous writer. But I just thought it was interesting that instead of hounding him about money, they said, you have a talent, pursue it, and see what happens with it. So now we need to talk about what's going on in the world during the time that Anderson is writing, because what's going on around us has a lot to do with the content that gets put out there. And one big thing is going to be the population. The population was seeing a huge growth. And this wasn't because of like immigration or anything like that. It was actually because there was a decrease in mortality. So less people were dying naturally, which is a good thing, but it also increased the growth rate, which can have a rippling effect on every other facet of life. Citizens of Denmark were also becoming less agricultural and becoming urbanized and industrialized. So we're seeing a lot less farms and ranches and stuff like that, and a lot more factories and cities being built around this time. Cost of living was increasing, but this didn't necessarily mean that the income was increasing. And so people are spending most of their money on food, clothing, and just trying to survive. So things like entertainment would probably be pretty important. So storytelling, reading, they're going to be a godsend around this time. Think about what we do to survive when times are rough. We need those outlets. We need to be able to sort of escape when life is tough. And so stories during a time without technology in particular is going to be a big deal. The parental figures, they're really interesting because in history, if you go back, oftentimes, depending on the social position, both parents might work, but it was almost always the father who would leave the home to make an income. So they weren't present in the home. So in the story, the king, and he's referred to as the old king, he's not really meant to be a presence. And even when the sopping wet princess shows up, he sends out someone to go see who it is. It's really the queen who is a presence. And so I think that's meant to be a reflection, whether it was intentional or not. It's the queen who sort of has an influence in the prince's life, where the king, he just is there. He is the father, he is the king, but he doesn't have as much of an influence as the queen does. And I think that is a reflection of the times. So just a little like nod to the family structure of the time period. Here's something else that can be said about the story, is that the princess being found out to be a princess is superficial. And sure, it could be. He's trying to find his princess. And especially right now, a lot of times we are trying to take away or go away from the whole princess concept and get down to real people. So let's do that. Let's say it's more about making sure the people we interact with and the people that we're going to commit to are who they say they are, and that they're real, that they're genuine, that they're not lying to us, right? So now let's take away that he's a prince and she's a princess, queen, king. Take away all that. It's just a boy trying to find his partner in life. But we want to make sure that she's not lying. So we give tests, and that's okay. That's not necessarily saying you don't trust someone. You're just making sure that that person is genuine. So if you look at it from that point of view, it's not as superficial, right? Again, this very small short story has a lot of meaning in it. It holds a lot of power. Something else that's really cool is that at the very end, Anderson says, and yes, this is a true story. I like that, because is it a true story? Probably not. I mean, where are his sources? Like, he doesn't state it as being an interview with a real prince and a real king. There's no names given. But it is true in the sense that it's a parable for life. We should be testing the people that we meet every day. We should be testing the information that we're given every day. We shouldn't just be taking things at face value. Even this prince who went out into the world to try and find his princess wasn't just believing every girl that told him they were a princess. In fact, he found something that they were telling him to be false every single time. And he may have even believed them at first, but then there was always some tell, some little lie that popped up that had him going, nope, sorry, I can no longer believe you because you just lied to me. That made him turn away and go home to what was familiar to him. And then when this princess showed up, he'd been lied to so many times, he no longer had it in him to even believe. And it took his mom, the queen, providing this, I guess you could say, foolproof test. It seems silly because it was a pea underneath 20 mattresses, but providing this test to sort of give him hope that there are genuine people out there. And there are. You can't give up that there are good people out there. Just know that you shouldn't take everything at face value. Know that it's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to give the tests. Don't be jerks about it, you know? Like, she wasn't a jerk about it. It may seem like it. If you've ever seen the pictures, like, the pictures are ridiculous. Seeing all the mattresses, like, seeing she has to put a ladder up on the mattresses to even get up there. So it seems ridiculous, but it's okay. I mean, if you're gonna spend your life with someone, you have every right to ask some questions, right? So I think that's the real takeaway here, is don't take everything at face value. Find your test. Put the pea under the mattresses and see if the next morning that person is still comfortable. If they're comfortable, then they don't feel shame or pain in their lives. And that's wrong. There's something wrong with that. Anyways, this one was shorter. It's a short story. There aren't mass productions of this story. But I'd love to hear what you think. And I'll see you next time. Happy trails, and don't stop reading fairy tales.